Do you believe trauma runs in families like a pattern or breaks with you?
Are you ready for a shocking truth? Do you know your true worth when the people closest to you keep telling you to shrink? That is the line that has been running through my head since my sister looked me straight in the eye and told me not to wear any jewelry to her big ceremony because, in her words, I did not deserve it. She said it with that smirk she has perfected since childhood, the one that makes you feel like a guest in your own family, and for once in my life I did not argue. I just nodded, because what she did not know is that I had already started planning something that would make her words collapse under their own weight. To give you context, this has not been a one-time job. It has been years of me carrying burdens that nobody else wanted to touch, and years of her taking up all the space with her carefully staged spotlight moments. When our parents had unpaid hospital bills, it was my card that went down. When the roof started leaking, it was me who fronted the cash while she promised she would handle the contractor next week, and then posted another picture from some weekend gala. I never said much because I was working double shifts as a paramedic, and frankly, when you are holding pressure on someone's bleeding wound in the back of an ambulance at 2 in the morning, you stop expecting applause at home. You just want quiet. But the quiet had turned into her playground. She would twist my silence into proof that I did not have much going on, that I was just the practical one. She knew how to keep the family's attention wrapped around her updates and her endless stories about how she was the one connecting nonprofits and donors, how she was the one always giving back, and how she was the one being recognized. The truth is she was good at networking, I will give her that, but she was also good at taking the shine from other people's work and polishing it for her own display. The clearest example came when I saved a man's life in a grocery store parking lot off-duty. I kept it quiet, partly because that is what first responders do, and partly because I just did not want the noise. Somehow, a week later, she was at a luncheon talking about how her organization was inspired by family heroics, and everyone assumed she had something to do with it. I let it slide at the time, but it sat heavy. So when she made her little demand about jewelry, I finally saw the pattern clearly. It was never about diamonds or gold. It was about making sure I was invisible at her event. She could not risk me outshining her, even by accident. That was when Ava, my closest friend from the EMS crew, said the one line that shifted my thinking completely: stop asking her for respect. Start invoicing. It was crass, it was blunt, and it made more sense than anything I had heard in years. That night, I opened the stack of folders I keep on my desk, the ones with every receipt, every statement, every email where I picked up what Lauren dropped. I had never planned to use them, but suddenly they were evidence of something undeniable. I had been carrying the weight while she carried the praise. Instead of waving them in her face, I thought about where they might matter most. And that is when I remembered something from the fine print of her gala invitation. Sponsors were entitled to a 30-second acknowledgement from the stage. The donors got their names read, their companies thanked, and their chosen causes highlighted. It was routine. So I took a chunk of my savings and sponsored a Community Heroes table. Nothing flashy. No big logos. Just a line in the contract that required an acknowledgement. And under reason for sponsorship, I wrote, in honor of first responders who show up when no one else can. It was not about me, at least not on the surface. It was about making sure the truth stood in the room. At the same time, I made a small donation to our station's relief fund in Lauren's honor with a condition that the MC publicly thank first responders during the program. Paperwork is powerful when you use it correctly. I did not tell Lauren any of this. She thought she had won because I stayed quiet and nodded. What she did not see was that I had moved the entire ground under her feet without raising my voice once. The next morning, I got an email from the gala coordinator. The subject line was short, acknowledgement note. The body said, "Do you want your name read on stage?" I stared at the blinking cursor in the reply box, and I typed only one sentence: read the reason this night exists. And that is where I left it. The email went out. No arguments. No scenes. No hint to Lauren that anything had changed. I went back to work that evening, answering calls, wrapping bandages, doing what I always do, but with a strange calm in my chest. For once, I was not playing defense. For once, I had made the first move. When I got home near midnight, I saw 3 missed calls from Lauren. No messages. Just her name flashing across my screen. I knew she must have caught wind of something, maybe a rumor about a new table at her gala, maybe a whisper from a donor who saw my name in the sponsorship list. I put my phone face down and let it buzz out. For the first time in a long time, I let her stew without rushing in to explain. I had set something in motion that could not be undone by one of her charm offensives or crocodile tears. And deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. By morning, the rumor had grown legs and was jogging laps around the donor list. Because before I even poured coffee, the coordinator sent a friendly note about final seating assignments along with a soft reminder that guest names needed to be confirmed by end of day. And buried near the bottom was the little surprise that my seat had been moved from the hero's table to a corner near the exit, which would have been fine if I were actually a coat rack. But since I am not, I took a breath, counted to 10 the way Captain Reyes always says to do when a scene gets noisy, and wrote back that my sponsorship explicitly included the hero's table and that my two guests would be Captain Reyes and Ava, both confirmed, both on time, and both prepared to behave like actual adults who understand that a ceremony is not a high school pep rally. I kept the tone steady and polite because people who run events appreciate clarity more than drama, and within half an hour the coordinator replied with a small apology and an updated diagram showing the table where it belonged, not up front with the cameras, but visible enough that no one could pretend it did not exist. I knew Lauren would see the update because she insists on approving everything down to the color of the napkins, and sure enough she called with that sing-song concern she uses when she wants to sound generous while issuing orders, asking whether I had requested special seating because it was her night and she did not want anyone to feel overshadowed, which is her way of saying she did not want me anywhere near the center of gravity. And I told her I had sponsored a table for first responders, that the recognition would be general and calm, and that she had nothing to worry about because I had no intention of making a scene or taking a microphone out of her hand. She shifted into a different gear and said perhaps it would be better if my guests were family-oriented, which translates to pliable and photo-friendly, and I told her, without raising my voice, that my guests were already confirmed and that both had spent more nights saving strangers than most people spend learning how to angle a selfie, which ended that part of the conversation quickly. Once the seating was locked, I drafted a short paragraph for the MC, nothing flowery. Just a straight acknowledgement that the event would like to thank first responders in the room and that an off-duty paramedic had assisted in a recent incident connected loosely to the honorees' community work, which was the politest way to stitch truth into a program that prefers soft fabric over sturdy thread. The MC wrote back almost immediately with gratitude because seasoned MCs love moments that give the room something honest to clap for, and he asked whether I wanted my name attached to the line, and I said no, please keep the focus on the work. Which was not me trying to be noble, it was me trying to keep the energy away from a sibling spat and toward something that might actually matter to someone who never gets invited to rooms like this. Ava thought the paragraph was almost too gentle and offered to spice it with a line that would make a few donors cough on their sparkling water, but I kept it clean, because the goal was not to turn the program into a roast or a courtroom. The goal was to slide the truth into the bloodstream so quietly that by the time anyone realized what had happened, the oxygen in the room had already changed. Captain Reyes, who measures praise in syllables and does not waste them, sent a thumbs up in the most literal sense, a single sentence saying the text was measured and appropriate, which, coming from him, qualifies as fireworks. Around lunchtime, Mom called to ask if I could be flexible about where I sat because Lauren was under pressure, and I told her I had already been flexible for years and that this time I was being precise, not loud, just precise. And that precision is what keeps an ambulance from turning into a second disaster, and she went quiet because she knows that when I reference work I am not trying to pull rank, I am reminding everyone that stakes exist outside family theater. A few minutes later, Dad texted a neutral line about being proud of both his girls and wanting the night to go smoothly, and I told him I wanted the same thing and that the smoothest nights are the ones where the facts are set early. By late afternoon, the coordinator forwarded the updated run of show, and there it was in black and white, slotted neatly between sponsor thanks and the honoree introduction, a simple line that read, Acknowledgement of first responders and off-duty paramedic, which made my chest feel both lighter and heavier at the same time, because once something is typed into a program it becomes harder to yank out without tearing the whole page, and that, in a way, was the point. Within 5 minutes my phone lit up again with Lauren's name, and, because I was tired of playing the same scene on loop, I let it roll to voicemail, where she delivered a long speech about betrayal, about optics, about how donors do not like surprises, about how narratives need to be controlled so the message does not fracture, and about how she had always supported my little career, which almost made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because anyone who has cleaned blood from their shoes after a shift knows that little is not a word that belongs anywhere near the work. I did not answer, not because I wanted to be cruel, but because I have learned that arguing with a narrator while she is mid-monologue only feeds the show, and I did not come to feed anything except the truth. Instead, I forwarded the MC paragraph, the sponsorship clause, and the coordinator's confirmation to Lauren's PR contact with a short note that said I was honored to support the evening and that all language had been cleared with the program team. And the PR contact, who has a good survival instinct, wrote back with a sterile thank you and no follow-up questions, which told me they had realized the train had already left the station and the best move was to step away from the tracks. That evening, during a quick turn at the station, Ava asked if I was ready for the inevitable last-minute stunt, because people who fear losing control tend to pull them right before showtime, and I said I was not interested in stunts. I was interested in accountability, which looks boring from the cheap seats until you realize it is the only thing that holds weight when everything else is spin. I also told her I had no plan to take a stage or deliver a speech, because there is nothing a room full of donors dislikes more than a hijacked microphone, and our point would be made without me saying a single extra word. When my shift ended, I checked my phone and saw a final email from the coordinator stamped late evening, a tidy line that read, "Small update. If the off-duty paramedic is willing, we will invite her to stand," followed by a polite question about whether that would be acceptable, and I stared at the screen for a long minute while the station common room hummed with vending machine noise. And I typed back that it would be acceptable if and only if the acknowledgement remained focused on first responders as a whole and not on me as an individual, which felt like threading a needle I had been carrying for years, and as I hit send, another message slid into my inbox, this one with a familiar name in the CC line and a subject that said, "Run of show revision," and before I even opened it I knew exactly who had just been looped in and how loud the next phone call was going to be. The email that confirmed the run of show revision landed late in the evening, and even before I clicked it open I knew exactly what had happened. Because Lauren does not let anything with her name attached move without sliding herself into the center of the conversation, and sure enough there it was, a neatly updated program draft where the acknowledgement of first responders remained intact. But now it carried a discreet notation that said finalized with family approval, which was her way of planting a flag she had not earned. I sat back in my chair, looked at the blinking screen, and felt that familiar urge to pick up the phone and shout that this was my life, my work, my sweat and blood, and that she had no right to stamp her seal on something she never lifted a hand to do. But then I remembered what Ava had told me, shouting only feeds the other side story. So instead of rage I chose precision. I pulled up the incident report from the city records, the one from the night when I knelt in a grocery store parking lot while an elderly man's heart stopped, when I started compressions with my bare hands because there was no kit nearby, when I kept at it for 7 long minutes until backup arrived and he had a chance at survival. The report number had been filed neatly with my name on it, cross-checked and signed off, and it was public record. I copied the number, attached the summary page, and sent it directly to the city's communications office with a short message that the gala MC might reference an off-duty paramedic and that, if any verification was required. Here was the official documentation. I did not editorialize, I did not add emotion, I simply provided facts that were not open to spin. The difference between facts and narratives is that facts are steady no matter who tells them, and Lauren has always relied on narrative. She loves being the one who controls the lighting, the tone, the mood, because if she can keep people busy with her story, then no one has time to ask questions that might reveal the cracks. This time, though, I had given the city itself the authority to verify what happened, and no amount of sibling charm or tears could erase an official report. Within hours, I could feel the shift. Lauren left me a voicemail, longer than any message she had ever left in her life, talking about betrayal, about family disloyalty, about how this was her night and I was ruining it, and how donors did not like messy stories. She spoke as though my existence were an inconvenience she had to manage, as though my work saving a life off duty was nothing more than background noise that might disrupt the perfect soundtrack she had planned. I listened once, then deleted it, because I knew that if I kept it I would be tempted to play it over and over until her voice felt like it was stitched into my skin. At the same time, Mom called again, her voice lower, almost pleading, asking if I could just let this one go because Lauren was under so much pressure, and I told her in the calmest tone I could manage that I was not making noise, I was not storming any stage. I was simply making sure the truth was not erased, and that if that felt like betrayal to anyone then maybe they needed to think about what they were building their night upon. She went quiet after that, and I could hear Dad's voice in the background, trying to steer the conversation toward peace. But peace has never been built by letting one person write everyone else out of the story. The part that made me laugh, in a bitter way, was when Lauren's PR person emailed me with a soft but firm request that the program was locked and that any changes at this stage would confuse the message, as if thanking first responders was some wild curveball that would send donors running for the doors. I forwarded back the sponsorship clause, highlighted in yellow, that guaranteed acknowledgement, and attached the city's confirmation that an off-duty paramedic had in fact been on scene in the incident connected to the honoree's nonprofit. The reply I got from the PR person was a single line that said, "Understood, thank you," which told me all I needed to know. They realized this was not a hill they could defend, because the ground beneath them was public record, not opinion. That night, Ava stopped by the station with takeout because she could see from my messages that I was teetering between satisfaction and exhaustion, and she told me straight that what I was doing mattered more than I might realize. Because it was not just about one sister and one gala, it was about setting a precedent that no one gets to feed on your silence forever. Captain Reyes, who was finishing paperwork across the table, looked up and added in his flat tone that documentation beats gossip every single time, which, from him, felt like a sermon. Before I went to bed, the coordinator sent another message, careful and polite, saying the MC would like to invite the off-duty paramedic to stand during the acknowledgement, just for a moment, nothing more, and would that be acceptable? I stared at the screen, the words almost glowing, because here it was, the line I had not crossed in years, stepping into the open as myself, not just the one who paid the bills behind the curtain, not just the one who worked the double shifts, but the one who actually carried the weight. I typed back that it would be acceptable, on the condition that the recognition stayed broad, focused on all first responders, because even in that moment I did not want to hand Lauren an excuse to say I had stolen her spotlight. As I closed the laptop, I knew the storm was not over. Lauren would see the update, she would know she had lost control of the narrative, and she would come at me with everything she had left. But I also knew something deeper. I had shifted the fight from the world of stories and optics into the world of facts and records, and once a battle moves onto that ground, spin dies quickly. For the first time in a long while, I lay down and slept without the churn of anger in my chest, because the truth had finally been nailed to the board where no one could pry it loose. What I did not know yet was how far she would go in the final days before the ceremony, or how many people she would try to pull into her orbit to keep the spotlight from slipping, but I knew one thing clearly: the facts were mine, and I had just proven I knew how to use them. By the time the week of the ceremony arrived, I had stopped waiting for another phone call or email from Lauren, because I knew exactly how she worked, and I knew she was not going to send anything that could later be used against her. So instead, she would wait until the moment she could corner me in person, look me dead in the eye, and try to rattle me with the sharp mix of sugar and venom she had been perfecting since high school. I told myself not to give her that stage, Yet when I arrived early at the event hall and handed the MC a sealed envelope containing the pledge cards and a quiet note requesting that, following the acknowledgement of first responders, guests be invited to consider matching a small donation to the station relief fund, I could already feel the energy of her presence hovering like static in the air, and I knew that it was only a matter of time before she appeared with her polished hair, that perfect smile, and the words she had lined up like weapons. I deliberately dressed plainly, nothing showy, no jewelry, no makeup beyond the minimum I would have worn on a long shift, because I wanted the contrast to be undeniable. She had told me not to wear jewels because I did not deserve them. And I was going to give her exactly what she demanded, except I would also bring with me something she could never buy or fake, which was a record of service and a medal earned through work no one would ever confuse with a photo shoot. Still, in that moment before the lights dimmed and the tables filled, I reminded myself of the rule Ava had drilled into my head: keep it clean, keep it calm, and let them reveal themselves when the pressure rises. It took less than 10 minutes for Lauren to appear in the green room hallway, her heels clicking against the floor as she leaned in close and whispered the kind of poison that sounds harmless to anyone passing by but lands sharp on the person receiving it. She told me flatly that if I stood when they called for an off-duty paramedic, I would be humiliating her, that the donors were there for her story, not mine, and that if I had any loyalty left in my bones, I would stay seated and smile from the shadows. I let her finish, then told her in one slow sentence that I was not going on stage. I was not stealing her spotlight. I was simply standing when asked, nothing more, and if she considered that an attack, then perhaps the problem was not me. The look on her face shifted instantly, the practiced charm slipping for just a second, and then she hissed that I was ungrateful, that after everything she had done for me I still wanted to make her look small. I smiled just enough to let her know she no longer had power and said, "You do not get to spend my work," then walked away before she could respond. When I took my seat at the heroes table, Ava gave me a tiny nod, the kind that said, "Good, you didn't break," and Captain Reyes, who never comments on family politics, leaned slightly closer and muttered that sometimes boundaries are the only form of kindness left. I almost laughed, because it was true. For years I thought being kind meant staying quiet, covering bills, carrying extra shifts, and letting her steal credit, but the truth was that kindness without boundaries had only bred contempt. And now I was finally giving her something she could not twist, clear lines that told her where her reach ended. As the hall filled, I could hear the murmur of donors and sponsors greeting one another, the clink of glasses, the shuffle of programs, and beneath it all the rising sense of anticipation that Lauren thrived on. Because she loved nothing more than orchestrating the perfect reveal of herself as the centerpiece of the evening. Yet, in this moment the centerpiece was already tilting, because no matter how the program played out, there would be a line spoken aloud that recognized something larger than her, and the room would hear it, absorb it, and remember it, even if only faintly. And that small fracture in her control was enough to shake the image she fought so hard to project. The MC approached our table before the program began and quietly confirmed that when the acknowledgement came he would invite first responders to stand, and he wanted to be sure I was comfortable with that. I thanked him and told him yes, on the condition that it remained broad and inclusive, because this was never about inflating my own name. It was about making sure the truth had oxygen. He nodded, satisfied, and walked away with the professional calm of a man who had hosted 100 such nights and understood that sometimes the subplots matter as much as the main stage. When the program began, I could see Lauren's face on the large screen projected for all the tables, her practiced smile, her confident stride, her voice just the right blend of humble and proud, and I almost admired the precision of her performance. But then, halfway through the sponsor acknowledgments, the MC paused, looked toward our table, and said the words that shifted the air in the room. "Tonight we also wish to acknowledge the first responders among us, including an off-duty paramedic whose actions in our community saved a life." Chairs scraped back, and people turned, and without rushing I stood, alongside Captain Reyes and Ava, who rose with me, steady and quiet. The applause was not thunderous, but it was sincere, and in that moment I felt something heavier than jewelry or borrowed shine. I felt seen without asking permission from anyone. Lauren's smile on the screen faltered, just slightly, just enough that anyone watching closely might wonder what flickered across her face, and I knew right then that the evening had shifted forever. She could continue her speech, she could collect her award, she could thank her sponsors, but she could never erase the fact that, in the middle of her carefully curated story, a moment of unvarnished truth had been stitched in place, and everyone in the room had witnessed it. The applause died down, the MC moved smoothly into the next segment, and the lights shifted back toward the stage, but I caught the glance of one of the donors at the adjacent table, a man who had been shaking hands with Lauren moments earlier. And the way he looked at me was different now, curious, appraising, like someone suddenly realizing the story he had been sold might not be the whole picture. I sat down slowly, my hands calm on the table, and Ava leaned over to whisper that silence can sometimes be the loudest form of justice, and she was right, because in that brief standing moment, without saying a single word, I had already reclaimed more ground than years of quiet endurance had ever given me. Yet I knew the night was far from over. The real test would come after the speeches ended, when donors mingled, when press photographers angled for their best shots, and when Lauren, desperate to regain control, would attempt one final twist to frame the narrative back in her favor. For now, though, I sat in the quiet aftermath, the echo of applause still in the air, and felt the power of a boundary finally enforced. When the program moved into its final segment and the MC returned to the microphone with the smooth confidence of someone who has shepherded many rooms through delicate transitions, I realized that the window for any muddled compromise had closed. Because the acknowledgments were complete, the sponsors had been thanked, the video montage had been played, and all that remained was the crescendo Lauren had designed for herself, a carefully stacked set of remarks that would position her as the generous center of gravity for everything good that ever brushed up against our family's name. And I understood in a way that felt almost physical that if I allowed the evening to end on that single note, then the truth I had worked so hard to anchor would be washed out by applause and champagne, which meant the small, measured final step I had saved for last had to be taken with the same calm refusal to flinch that had carried me this far. The MC spoke Lauren's name with a tone that signals the room to rise, and the room obeyed, because people enjoy the choreography of events that make them feel part of something streamlined and important. And as she crossed the stage in that practiced rhythm, she glanced toward the hero's table with a look that said she believed the worst was behind her, that the earlier acknowledgement had been a small bump rather than a reframe, and that if she delivered the right phrases with the right smile, the narrative would collapse back into her hands without leaving a mark. Yet the one thing she had not accounted for was that I had not come here to take anything from her. I had come to return something to its rightful owner. Which meant I did not need a microphone, I needed timing, and I needed the weight of something that cannot be argued. She began to speak about community and resilience and shared values, and while none of it was offensive, all of it floated above the ground where the work actually lives, and I could feel the room settling into the comfortable fog of agreeable words. Which is exactly when I slid the small case from my bag, opened it with emotion so quiet it felt like a breath, and pinned my Medal of Valor where every person in my line of sight could see it without the MC ever having to announce a thing. Because the point was never to seize the stage, the point was to put a simple, unarguable fact into view at the exact moment the evening would have preferred to drift away from facts altogether. There is a kind of silence that signals confusion, and there is another kind that signals recognition, and what fell over the room then belonged to the second kind, because faces that had been politely attentive turned sharp, and a few hands that had been mid-clap paused, and that pause spread in a wave that stopped at the edge of the stage, where Captain Reyes, who had stayed seated like a statue for most of the night, stood without being asked and, in a voice free of hype or flourish, confirmed what the medal meant when it had been awarded, and that it had been earned for a save made off duty, which was all the room needed to move from curiosity to clarity, and once clarity arrived, you could feel people recalculating what they thought they knew about the stories told in that family, and who had paid the actual price for the good endings. I did not speak, because there was nothing I could have said that would have added value, and in that refusal to narrate I felt a steadiness I had not known in years, the steadiness of a person who no longer worries about being edited out. Because the record is already public and the evidence is already in plain view, and the only remaining question is whether those who benefited from the old version will adapt or dig in. The MC, to his credit, did not fumble, because true professionals know how to fold truth into the flow without turning it into a spectacle, and he simply nodded, thanked first responders again in one clean sentence, and read the line from my note inviting anyone moved by the moment to match a modest donation to the Station Relief Fund, which turned the room from spectators into participants in a way that no branding deck can manufacture. Across a few tables, I watched donors reach for pledge cards with the unhurried focus of people who had already decided before they stood. And I saw two of Lauren's most vocal supporters fill out amounts that would mean new equipment and counseling stipends for crews who carry more than most people understand. And I felt a quiet relief that had nothing to do with winning or headlines and everything to do with redirecting attention back toward the people who actually hold the line when life tilts. Lauren tried to steer the energy by adding a line about our family's tradition of service, but the words hit the air without traction, because the room was now responding to something more solid than a tagline. And when she looked toward me with the practiced warmth she uses to reclaim attention, I did not move. I simply handed the sealed envelope of pledge cards to Captain Reyes in full view of the stage, a gesture that said the work will go where it belongs without passing through any filter. After the lights came up and the formal part ended, the real verdict emerged in the only currency that matters at events like this, which is who people choose to approach when there is nothing left to gain, and they came to me in a steady line, not for selfies or gossip, but for brief, grounded conversations that ended with a handshake and a promise to follow through, and behind them came two younger volunteers from Lauren's organization who asked how they could shadow at the station on their days off, which was the kind of result that cannot be manufactured by a hashtag. My parents found me near the exit, and in the hesitant way that belongs to families that are learning new rules, they said they had not understood how heavy some of this had been, which did not erase the years, but did feel like a step onto firmer ground. Lauren left early with a cluster of handlers and a face that suggested she was rewriting her messaging in real time, and I did not chase her, because the point of the night was never to wring an apology from someone who treats apologies as currency. The point was to end a pattern in which my silence fed a machine that did not feed me back, and that pattern ended the moment the room saw what it needed to see and acted accordingly. On the ride home, Ava leaned her head back and said that while some people use rule-breaking as an excuse to be cruel, I had used it as a way to cut a knot that had kept everyone tied up for years, and I let that land because it matched exactly how it felt. Not triumphant in the childish sense, but clean and final in the adult sense that lets you sleep. Later that night, I sent Lauren one text with no lecture attached, only a line that said that next time she could ask for the whole truth and I would gladly give it, because the door is not closed to honesty even if it is closed to manipulation. And I put my phone face down without waiting for a response. Somewhere there will be a conversation where she tells someone that I made her night difficult. And somewhere else there will be a conversation where a donor tells someone that the moment they decided to give more came when a different kind of story walked into the room and refused to perform, and I cannot control which conversation travels farther. But for the first time in many years I do not need to, because the people who needed to see it, saw it, the people who needed to choose, chose, and the person who needed to stop shrinking, stopped.